The month of July started with the introduction of the worst event this game has known, the first ever world tournament. The first world tournament on JP versus the first world tournament on Global are like two whole different stories. However, since I'm focusing on the GP timeline in the series, I'm going to talk about the actual first ever world tournament on the JP version of the game. It introduced 3 new characters and 4 new Dokkan Awakenings. Text percent Goku was just Strength percent Bardock but with a worse leader skill. Agel Roshi and Int End of Z Goku had some use because of their key support, but the other units just weren't worth the grind, honestly. Well, if you want to get technical about it, no unit was actually worth the grind, because honestly, in my opinion, the first world tournament was probably the worst possible way to waste your time. Like, there's legit no word to just describe how bad this event was at the time. Like, there were no AoE units at all in the game, which alone should tell you how bad that event was. Just imagine beating a world tournament without any AoE units, like not even a single AoE unit. And that's not even the worst of it. There was no leader in the game that actually gave key and damage at the same time. So you had to choose between key or damage, not both. Also, don't forget that there was no potential system at the time, meaning no additional spear attack. And resources were also extremely scarce back then, meaning that most of your characters weren't even fully leveled up, let alone SA leveled. Meaning that even if you managed to super with a character, you weren't even guaranteed to get a kill. And let's say even if you managed to do so, you had 6 other characters to kill. In the first round, you had to face 3 different players. Then you had to kill 21 characters. Bro, just do the math. Like, that's already like an absurd amount of time just gone like that. And bro, honestly, the rewards weren't even worth it. In JP, the first world tournament didn't even have SSR tickets or anything like that. You weren't even guaranteed a character unless you were in the top 30,000 players. The base rewards outside of rankings required you to win the world tournament 30 times for like 22 stones. Not even a multi-summon. And the rates were so trash back then, so multi-summons were even less valuable at the time. This was just an L, like a huge L. I seriously don't understand how the developers tested something like that and were like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I know the work culture in Japan is like very intense and everything, but honestly, this is just too much. Like, this is slavery, like, bro. 2 weeks later, they dropped a new banner featuring a new Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta. If I had to guess, I would assume that it's probably because the GP players were probably not satisfied with the Strength Blue Vegeta being worse than his Goku counterpart. Nonetheless, this guy was very good. He still had an extreme damage multiplier, but his passive was way better now. His leader skills were also not bad, but the main problem with that guy was his link set. Like, Realm of Gods links were just not that great at the time, since the meta revolved almost exclusively around Super Saiyan characters, with links like Saiyan Warrior Race, Shock and Speed, Golden Warrior, Super Saiyan, and Over in a Flash because of units like Super Saiyan Goku and Tech Majin Vegeta. 3 days later, we got another banner, this time introducing Frieza's brother into the game. Kula! Frieza's brother! Tech Final Form Cooler was probably the strongest extreme class unit at the time. He was legit just a modern version of Tech Final Form Frieza, the former hardest hidden unit in the game. His leader skill was also pretty decent. They also dropped at the same time a story event where you could farm medals to awaken the summonable SR Cooler and to Final Form Cooler. That cooler was alright if you didn't have Tech Cooler, but really nothing crazy. Fun fact, this guy's link set is actually different across both versions. On Global he has Prodigies and on JP he has Cold Judgment. Also, I didn't even know that, but this guy was actually farmable from that event at the time, but got removed later on for whatever reasons we brought back on when they revamped it. Nonetheless, his grind was apparently one of the worst of all time. You had to run the stage like 100 times just to drop one single card, and for whatever weird reason, SR Strike Mecha Frieza was in the drop pool. So if you dropped a character, there was a 50% chance that it wasn't going to be SR in cooler. Like, bro, that's honestly just asinine. Like, bro, like, like, what were they thinking? Like, they seriously really didn't care back then. Like, bro, just imagine you're like farming an EZA and like there was a 50% chance that the medals we were going to get were from another EZA. Like, it makes literally no sense. At the same time, they also released new quest stages where you could now farm a new Android 13 and awaken him using medals from said stages. He was pretty decent for a free to play card, but man was his grind tedious. I especially remember that because I tried to pre-farm him on Global before they updated the drop drop rates, and this guy just wasn't worth it at all. Like, you don't understand, the drop rates were absolutely horrendous. And not only were the drop rates absolutely trash, I think if I remember correctly, one of those stages had a huge map, and like, bro, the map was just so laggy and so slow. Like, bro, just this guy's grind was just not worth it. Talking about tedious grinds, they actually dropped another story event where you could farm medals every day to awaken some SRs and to grade Siamans. Because yes, when this event first dropped, each day different stages were available, so you had to be fast to farm those medals, and you had to farm a lot of them with pretty bad rates. After the 6th day, you were now able to awaken the free-to-play Gohan and to grade Saiyaman. And well, he was okay for a free-to-play unit, but really nothing that great. As for the summonable one, well, he wasn't great either, and they pretty much both suffered from the same problem. They both had a very bad link set. The two other Videls, on the other hand, even though not great, 2 had some use. The Tech 1 debuffed AGL and N-type enemies, which was useful if you're trying to farm an AGL or N-type character, and the Strength Videl had the same leader skill as Strength % Bardock. So if you still didn't have him or any of his substitutes, you could easily use her as your leader for the time being. She was legit just a free-to-play version of % Bardock, but with a worse link set and worse support. Anyways, this story event came with a new banner introducing 18 % Gohan into the game. This guy had the same leader skill as Strength % Bardock, a supreme damage multiplier, a 70% attack buff on super, and a decent league set. So this guy was actually pretty good. Not a bad card at all. He was like the int version of Strength % Trigoku. The month ended with another high banner, this time bringing Physical Ultimate Gohan and AGL Kid Buu into the game. This was actually the first banner to give you a guaranteed new character per multi-summon. This didn't mean a new SSR per se, but if you already had all the SR and Rs in the game, I guess it did. Nonetheless, Physical Ultimate Gohan completely changed the meta with his new leader skill. He was the first card to give 2 ki to all types, meaning if you ran 2 of him, you were able to super pretty consistently, which was a huge deal at the time. Not only that, but he was the first unit to have an attack buff on super attack. Couple that with his supreme damage multiplier and the 70% attack buff he got from his passive, and you had yourself a unit that could hit pretty hard, but also consistently. His only drawback really was his link set. It sucked at the time. The only good link he had was Shock and Speed, and Shock and Speed was seen by many at the time as the best key link in the game, and the one to build your team around. While Over and Flash was better, but only Wells could really make use of it, since very few characters had this link. So yeah, Physical Ultimate Gohan was a pretty good card. I wish I could say the same about AGL Kid, but this guy had a questionable leader skill and just more healing in his passive. Like, the healing was good, but when every single unit you link with heals 2 while doing absolutely nothing else, well, it's bad. And that's not even to mention the fact that this guy had 0 key links, so good luck spraying with him. I guess in some niche scenarios you could cook an unkillable team with him and other boos, but man, if it takes you 2 years to kill the enemy, what's the point? The month of August started with a V-Jump exclusive SR AGL Beerus. His leader skill gave 2 ki to AGL type units, he did extreme damage and lowered defense on super, and he had an 8% chance to give 3 ki to all allies. So as you guessed it, he wasn't very good unless you are a new player and just needed a filler unit to get by. The next day, it was already time for the second world tournament. Like, bro, they didn't even give people enough time to recover from the first world tournament. Like, I honestly pity the GP players who had to go through that. Like, don't forget that there's still no AoE units in the game. This is just as bad as the first world tournament. Nonetheless, this world tournament brought 1 new Awakening and 2 new reward cards. The Awakened R Strength Krillin into an SR, and obviously he wasn't good, but he could be used in some niche scenarios since he linked pretty well with the other Dragon Ball Saga units like the Strike Event Jackie Chun. As for the actual reward card, AGL Bardock was not bad. Like, sure, he had a subpar leader skill and did extreme damage, but he was a key support type unit given 2 ki to all AGL and strength type units. And since he was the first SSR base form Bardock, he linked pretty well with Strength % Bardock, who was still an outstanding unit. So yeah, this guy had value just because he was named Bardock, quite literally. If this guy was something like Garlic Jr., bro, honestly, he would have probably seen as complete trash and not worth the farm. Bardock also came with a new SR GT Goku, who is actually still to this day a GP exclusive. Like, this guy never came to global. They completely forgot about him. But it doesn't really matter since that guy was not that good even at the time. Like, sure, his leader skill and start of turn attack buff were alright for an SR, but his damage multiplier and link set were really not that good. I think he was like the only unit in the game at the time to have to GT link, which was a good link, but it didn't matter if there was no other unit in the game to share it with. After the storm, they dropped the first banner of the month featuring 3 new SSRs, AGL God Goku, Tech Whiz, and Strength Beerus. God Goku was actually insane. He had the same leader skill as the best unit in the game. He had a supreme damage multiplier and an insane attack buff in his passive, which was actually activated on Super, just like AGL's percent Blue Goku. But what made this guy way better than Blue Goku was his link set. Bro, this guy had 2 of the best key links at the time, Shock and Speed and Over and a Flash. So this guy was just a key battery that also did a ton of damage. So yeah, this guy was pretty much the new best unit in the game. They thrown in Strength percent Goku. And it was also pretty clear now that the meta was now moving on from Super Saiyan units to Over and a Flash units. Tech Whiz was seen as many as a missed opportunity because if you look at his leader skill, he literally leads all the types that had at least 1 unit with the Over and a Flash link. But for whatever reason, they didn't give him the link himself. So yeah, the dream of running a crazy team with like Majin Vegeta, God Goku, Strength percent Goku under a 25% attack and defense leader skill was over. Like, don't get me wrong, you could still run that team and it still was like a top tier team, but it could have been like way better if Tech Whiz just had the Over and a Flash link. Nonetheless, he had a supreme damage multiplier and lowered attack on Super, which was good, and he also had a high chance of stunning the attacked enemy as his passive, something that was never seen before at the time, so it did have some value. Strength Beerus, this guy was an interesting card to say the least. His leader skill was okay, his damage was okay, his multiplier was supreme, and he lowered defense on Super. But what made him interesting was his passive. He had a high chance of raising his attack by 150%. Like, this was the highest damage combo seen to date. Supreme damage multiplier with 150% attack. Like, just to put things into perspective, the biggest one before him was AGL Blue Goku, who also had the supreme damage multiplier but only an 80% attack buff. So yeah, if that part of his passive proc, this guy was pretty much the hardest hidden unit in the game. And honestly, this sounds crazy on paper, especially when you look at it now, like a high chance, 50% chance, right? Well, no, his high chance was actually a 30% chance of him raising his attack. So yeah, you had a 70% chance of him basically doing nothing. And that's not even pointing out the fact that this guy had a horrible link set. Like, bro, his best linking partner was AGL God Goku and he only shared 2 links with him, Godly Power and Shock and Speed, giving him 2 key and 50% attack. This banner also brought 2 new SRs, but they weren't really that great. Like, Inbu had an interesting passive, but with his low SR stats, lack of key links, and extreme damage SA multiplier, there was just no way you could actually put that passive to use. But you could actually use him to raise the super attack level of Physical Buu, and the same for Vegeta. He could be saved to raise the super attack level of future base form Vegetas. The celebration introduced a new Battle of God story event, where you could farm a new base form Goku from the Battle of God movie, as well as medals to awaken one of the summonable SR Goku into Super Saiyan God. The farmable R Goku didn't bring anything new to the table since his drop rates were worse than the epic showdown R Goku, so if you wanted to farm a base form Goku, you're better off just farming that guy. On the other hand, physical Super Saiyan God Goku was actually a pretty decent alternative if you didn't pull AGL's Super God Goku. He had a decent leader skill and was a support type unit for strength and physical type, giving them 20% attack. The only real downside of this guy were his extreme damage multiplier and lack of key links. Like, bro, this guy had 0 key links, which would have been fine if he had some key in his passive or leader skill, but no, this guy was just pure raw stats. But like I said, he was a unique name character with only AGL's percent God Goku sharing his name, so if you didn't pull him, that guy was a decent option. 2 weeks later, we got a new banner featuring Turles and one hand Spirit Bomb Goku, and bro, let me tell you that Turles was cracked. He had the same leader skill as physical Ultimate Gohan from the month prior, but what made him really stand out is that he also was a key support type unit, giving 2 key to all allies as long as you were above 50% HP. Like, bro, this meant that you could run 2 Turleses as your leaders, float them off, run another key support type unit as a floater, have 2 rotations of heavy damage dealers, and boom, you had 6 key at all times, meaning that key was no longer an issue. This opened up so many possibilities. You could pretty much build any team you wanted with this guy, so this pretty much made that guy the new best extreme class unit, and arguably even the new best unit in the game. The only downside to this guy were really his extreme damage multiplier and unique link set, which weren't really a problem when you look at the value this guy provided. Not only was he a key support type unit, but he also had a a 50% chance to stun the enemy for 2 turns on super attack. Like, that's pretty damn good when you take into consideration how easy it is to super attack on his team. I wish I could say the same about One Hand Spirit Bomb Goku. Like, he wasn't bad, but he just wasn't Interless, you know? Like, quite the opposite actually. While Interless was extremely versatile and could be used pretty much everywhere, this guy was very niche. You could only really make the best out of him when facing an in-type unit. And yes, I agree, against in-type enemies, this guy's team was insane. You were pretty much invincible. All you had to do was bring some orb changing items and you were good to go. But other than that, he was very mid. Like, he had an extreme damage multiplier, which kind of sucked since he was meant to be a nuker and do damage. And bro, his link set was also not that great. He only had one key link being prepared for battle, which was not a very common link at the time. The other cards that came with the banner were really nothing special, and honestly not really worth going over. I guess Amond, or however you spell that name, was honestly not that bad since he could seal on super and was a support type unit given 10% attack and defense to all allies. Like, you're definitely not going to use R Raisin for his medium chance of disabling the enemy guards. Even though surprisingly some people did at the time. The celebration came with a new Tree of Might story event where you could farm some new characters. SR Turles was nothing like his summonable counterpart. Like, he was just a straight debuffer. So I guess if you didn't have Interless, you could use him, I guess, against a physical type enemy. But for the most part, this guy was mostly seen as a means to raise the super attack level of Interless. SR physical dies was alright. I guess if you're a new player and you had legit no other options. And R Lakazai was interesting, I guess. Like, he had a 30% damage reduction when his card was activated. So this guy was surprisingly a pretty good tank if you're facing an in-type enemy. 2 days later, the game had his first download celebration. The 20 million download celebration. They gave everyone a free SR Angel Goku. This guy was actually not bad if you're a new player. He had an Oki leader skill and was a healer. Also, fun fact, but this guy on Global was actually just the second awakening of the epic showdown R Goku, making him, if I'm not mistaken, one of the only card in game to change type upon being Dokkan Awakened. The 20 million download celebration also came with its own banner, and let me tell you, that banner was cracked. It had 20 discounted multis and 20 discounted singles, while also featuring Strengths percent Goku, Ins percent Gohan, Physicals percent Vegeta, AGLs percent Sugoku, AGL Kaikan Goku, Physical Ultimate Gohan, and Tech Whis. So a very good banner that baited many Japanese players at the time, especially Wells with that insane 20 discounted multis. Like, bro, what the hell is that? Just imagine if the global first Rose banner had 20 discounted multis. Like, I skipped that banner, but if it had 20 discounted multis, I would have summoned like crazy. That's just so insane. Like, sure, Physicals percent Vegeta sucked, but pretty much every other unit in the banner was still somewhat decent. The celebration also brought 2 new Super Strike units, SR Enchilled and SR Grandpa Gohan. But unfortunately, by that time, the era of SR Strike characters being relevant was pretty much over. They still had huge damage multiplier, low stats, and with the new 2 key to all types leader skills, their leader skills were not that great anymore. Like, bro, just look at Grandpa Gohan passive skill. What is that? Like, 1 key? Like, even for the time, that was trash. Like, bro. SR Chill on the other hand was a nuker, so I guess he wasn't completely worthless, but yes, strike units were now officially dead. Well, until their revamp, but we'll talk about that in due time. If you're wondering why they dropped such an insane banner for a $20 million celebration, well, if you know anything about gacha games, it's pretty obvious. This was a bait. A big bait, because something insane was coming. Something that nobody expected at the time. The first ever Dokkanfest, Strength Broly. And oh boy, was this guy insane. He introduced a new leader skill meta, which honestly wasn't that game breaking. You were probably still better off running double Interless for the most part, but what really made that guy game breaking was his super attack. He was the first AoE unit ever, meaning that you could wipe the whole board with one super attack. This single-handedly made this guy a must for World Tournament. Like, it's either you had him or just don't even bother with the World Tournament. But he had a drawback. His defense was reduced to 0 on super attack. So yeah, this guy was the definition of glass cannon. Kill everyone before they touch you, which was honestly fine at the time since nothing could survive one of his supers. His Dokkan event came with a new farmable base form Broly that could awaken into Super Saiyan Broly. And for a free-to-play unit, that physical Super Saiyan Broly was actually pretty good. He had decent stats, an alright leader skill, and start of turn attack buff. Like, he could output some decent numbers. But talking about Broly's Dokkan event, like, holy, this guy was probably harder than Red Zone Broly. Like, bro, if you didn't have a unit that could disable his Rampage ability, you literally just couldn't damage this guy. And bro, the AGL type was not as stacked as you would think at the time. Your best options were all premium units that you had to summon for. So unless you were a well or a very lucky player, you were going to have a hard time building a decent AGL team to face that guy. But that's not even the worst thing. Unlike Red Zone Broly, where you had 3 runs a day, you pretty much only had 1 or 2 runs in this guy event, since the Z-Hard stage costed 40 stamina at the time, and most players still had very low rank levels, so they didn't have a lot of stamina, and you for sure weren't going to use stones to replenish your stamina. You're honestly better off using your stones to summon on his banner and pull one of those new units that could disable his Rampage ability. And bro, you may be thinking like, okay, well, it's not actually the worst thing in the world that you have to summon on his banner to beat his Dokkan event, since if you didn't pull him, there was no reason for you to beat his Dokkan event. And look, you've got a point, but let's not forget yet again that the rates at the time were absolutely horrendous. So the chances were pretty high that you could manage to pull Broly, but none of the other featured units. And trust me, you didn't want to have this guy on Dokkan Awakened. Like, his TUR was great, but his SSR, that's another story. No AoE on Super, but with the same drawbacks. So yeah, you absolutely needed to beat his Dokkan event. Talking about his banner, it came with 6 new SSRs, something never seen before. Like 6 new SSRs in a single banner. Super Saiyan Gohan was actually the best unit in there for Broly's Dokkan event, since not only did he disable Broly's Rampage, he was AGL, had a supreme damage multiplier, and had a 70% attack buff on super attack. Like, this guy was a game changer for Broly's Dokkan event. Strength Super Saiyan Goku was probably the second best unit against Broly. He had a supreme damage multiplier, disabled Broly's Rampage, and had Tsuki and a 2000 flat stat buff above 80% HP. His leader skill also included all types you would run against Broly, so he was pretty decent. Strength Goten, the first unit to have a Nukin leader skill, if I'm not wrong, while also being the first unit to orb change. So yeah, this guy was actually pretty valuable, and since he also disabled Rampage, he was a very good option against Broly's Dokkan event. Super Saiyan GT Goku was honestly very mid. Like, he had an extreme damage multiplier and a 40% star of turn attack buff, but looking at the other featured units, the GT Link was starting to look pretty good. Super Saiyan GT Trunks had a very unique leader skill, where he buffed the heal from same type orbs. This could have been good on like a very tanky team, but on a Super Saiyan character this was pretty much useless. He was a tech and strength type key support though, which was pretty good, so even with his extreme damage multiplier, he still was a decently valuable unit. Strength Majub also had a very interesting leader skill, tricky to all allies when above 80% HP. If you were able to stay above that HP threshold, this was probably the best leader skill in the game. But it was pretty much impossible to do so in a hard event like Broly's Dokkan event. The rest of his kit was also not great. Like, sure, he lowered attack on super, but he had an extreme damage multiplier, a flat stat buff when above 80% HP, and a horrible link set. So yeah, overall, not that great of a card. The banner also came with 5 new SRs and 1 new R. 3 of them were GT characters, which was actually a good thing at the time, since it meant more character to share the GT link with, and they were all support type units, so the perfect filler units to slap on your team if you were a new player and didn't have any better options. SR Paragas had an interesting leader skill if you were a new player and had no better options, and he also had SR in Jacko passive skill, but with a 4% chance of stunning all enemies instead of 7. R Hercule had an interesting leader skill too, damage received reduced by 10%, and his passive skill gave him an additional 30% damage reduction when his guard was active. So yeah, no one was running this guy as a leader since he was only usable against an int-type unit, and in that case you were better off just running one-hand Spirit Bomb Goku. But if you were facing an int-type unit, this guy was surprisingly not a bad option. If you're a new player, this guy was a lifesaver for any int-type strike event, and we already had 3 of those at the time. SR% Kid Trunks was for sure the most valuable SR in the banner, probably even more valuable than some of the featured SSRs, and that's because this guy was built for the Broly's Dokkan event. He was AGL, disabled Broly's Rampage, and was an AGL type orb changer. Like nowadays, this sounds just so trash, but at the time, this guy was actually one of your best options against Broly. And talking about Broly, this guy Dokkan event was not the only nightmare that month. 2 days later came the third World Tournament. So I guess it was official now that they were going to release a World Tournament every single month moving forward. But just imagine that, a World Tournament every single month. That seems like hell. Nonetheless, if you pulled Broly, you probably had a blast at World Tournament. Imagine going from no AO units at all to just 1 or 2. Like, the jump in quality of life was massive, as you can imagine. Like, World Tournament went from being the single worst event made in history of gacha games to actually still being hell, but way better. They also bumped the World Tournament rewards from 22 stones to 37 stones. Nothing crazy, but better than nothing. Like, honestly, 22 stones was criminal if you consider how hard the first 2 World Tournaments actually were. This World Tournament introduced the World Tournament ticket summon banner, like the free-to-play one. So even if you weren't able to get a copy of the main World Tournament unit, you would at least get some tickets to summon on that banner, who unlike today did hold some value. This banner brought 13 new units, 3 new SSRs, 6 new SRs, and 4 new Rs. SSR Tech Demon King Piccolo had the same leader skill type as the first ever summonable SSRs, so pretty much outdated by that time. Like, the game had been out for almost 9 months now, and if you're a new player, you weren't getting any of those tickets anyways, since the World Tournament was still not a beginner friendly event. So yeah, kind of a bummer. He also had an extreme damage multiplier, which was an L, but he had a 10% chance to stun on super, which was something, I guess. The only good thing really about this guy was that he was a key support type unit, given 2 key to tech and in type units. SSR in Demon King Piccolo on the other hand had the best leader skill at the time. As a free to play unit, this was insane. He had an extreme damage multiplier and lower defense on super, but he debuffed on his passive, reducing the enemy's attack by 12% at all time. This was actually a pretty good passive for a unit that had a good leader skill, but the great thing about this guy is that he had a different name than his tech variant, so you could actually link them up together, and they shared 5 links. So even though they weren't insane alone, linked together they were actually a pretty decent rotation. SSR Strength Kid Goku was pretty much the fish play variant of Strength Super Saiyan 3 Goku. They shared the same type and leader skill. It's just that Kid Goku had an extreme damage multiplier and that his 70% attack buff was up when facing 3 or more enemies, which was still a recurrent thing in like the quest mode, story events, and obviously the World Tournament. So yeah, not a bad card. As for the rest of the banner units, I'm not going to go over all of them since there's really nothing interesting to say about them except for one guy, and you know who I'm talking about. This is the banner that introduced Devilman into the game. This guy is probably single-handedly the most valuable card to ever release for a free-to-play player. This guy, as you probably know, it has a 1% chance to get 1,000,000% attack, so pretty much one-shot anything in the game. And like, I know it's just a 1% chance, and unless you had a key leader, super attacks were still a hard thing to consistently pull off. But if you had the patience to pull through with this guy, you could pretty much beat any event in the game, and this is something that became extremely valuable with time, so this guy will be brought up in future episodes. The World Tournament reward card was not only a very hype character but also very good. He was pretty much on par with Tech Super Saiyan Goku, and just so you guys know, back then we had no potential system, so free to play units and summonable units pretty much had the same stats. So yeah, this guy had a supreme damage multiplier and was a key support type unit given 2 key to HL and tech type units. If you had Strength Broly, this guy was definitely worth the grind. 2 weeks later we had the first ever Dokkan crossover campaign, and with none other than One Piece. It's honestly crazy to think that we could have had a One Piece character in Dokkan. Well, technically we did get a Doflamingo card, but he wasn't a playable unit, just a boss. But yeah, unfortunately all we got as a playable card is a Bye Guys Goku. For a free to play character, this guy was very good. He had a decent leader skill for a free to play unit, a 20% chance to stun on super, but more importantly this guy gave 2 key to all allies when he was above 50% HP. So this guy alongside Interlist were the only units in the game to key support units of every type. So yeah, a very good unit, and his card art is just so cool. I wish they actually saved that for an LR Bye Guys Goku. The month ended with a new Buu Saga banner featuring the one and only Vegito, 2 new Super Saiyans, and 4 new SRs and R characters. Tech Vegito was pretty much the new Strength Super Saiyan Bardock. Same leader skill, but better super attack effect and better passive. He was insane to say the least, and if you had him, he was pretty much a must run on every single Saiyan team. Strength Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta was also pretty good. He had an interesting leader skill, like slightly worse than Interlist or Ultimate Gohan, but still very good nonetheless, given 2 key to 3 types was nothing to laugh at. He also had a supreme damage multiplier coupled with a 60% attack buff, and I'm pretty sure that attack buff on key 7 or more was calculated on super attack. So with a super type unit like Tech Vegeta, this guy could hit some pretty impressive numbers. Physical percent Sugoku was legit just Tech's percent Sugoku but for the physical type. Literally, there's nothing else to say about this guy. He was just a copy of Tech's percent Sugoku. So yeah, he was good. As for the other units, well, Dabura and Piccolo had interesting leader skills, reducing the attack of Tech and physical type enemies, while also lowering attack on super attack. So pretty much good filler units if you were trying to farm some strike characters of one of those types. During the same celebration, they actually released a new stage for the One Piece crossover event, and this new stage dropped an awakened UR version of the Bye Guys Goku. His drop rate was pretty bad, but nothing crazy for these days standards. So he wasn't harder to farm than any other unit at the time, but he was definitely more worth it than them. Not only was he good like I explained earlier, but now that he dropped as a UR, you could actually use him to raise the super attack level of any percent Goku at the time. There was also a campaign related to that event where players would work together for prizes, pretty much like those Spirit Bomb campaigns during Big Celebration. Every milestones gave a different character coupled with Zenny Dragon Stones and training items. The characters were SRs for the most part, so nothing really interesting. I guess SR Tech Piccolo was a super type unit, so there's that. The final milestone actually gave an SSR character, and now they did one, but an SSR nonetheless. Anyways guys, this is the end of the video. If you enjoy this type of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Additionally, if you have some bucks to spare and wish to support the channel financially, you might consider becoming a member. You will receive some cool icons next to your name and early access to new videos as soon as I finish them. I appreciate all of your support, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.